It is a sunny morning here on Old Klang Road and I'm with Denza because today we're going to go on a media drive with the new D9 from here in KL out to sunny Desaru. Now through this 5-hour drive there are a few things that we want to suss out, things like comfort, energy efficiency and more importantly whether or not the best-selling luxury electric MPV on the market deserves the moniker. Well, it is day 2 on the Denza D9 media drive and you join me in Denza Scooai here in Johor. Now, the first day sort of went by a little bit too quickly. I think that the schedule sort of ran a little bit and so there was a little bit of rushing and so there wasn't a lot of time for me to sort of compile my thoughts. However, it has served as something of a blessing in disguise because it does mean that I've had a bit more time to live with my opinion and also to understand the brand a little bit better because yesterday we did visit a Denza showroom in Malacca and now we're in Scooai. We're having lunch now but we're about to move off back towards Kuala Lumpur and having spent a decent amount of time in the car both as a driver as well as a passenger, I feel that I'm slightly better equipped to provide a sort of summary of the experience of having covered about 1,000 kilometers in a Denza D9 all-wheel drive. So yesterday we drove the D9 from Kuala Lumpur all the way down to Malacca where we stopped for lunch and the cars were charged a little bit before we then continued our journey down to Desaru. Now if you've watched our earlier video of the Denza D9 review, that was of the front wheel drive model which has some specification differences but the key spec difference between the two, to me at least, is the suspension setup. Now this all-wheel drive model benefits from using something that's referred to as the DICES-C suspension system which is an adaptive, electrically adjustable damping system which adjusts the variation of the dampers in the car itself. Now, Denza says that this improves body control to some extent while not compromising in terms of comfort. And from my experience yesterday being sat predominantly in the rear, I can say there is a little bit of an improvement. Now, when I was chauffeur driven in the D9 front wheel drive, the one without this fancy trick suspension, it did feel like the car suffered from a bit too much vertical movement, which did make it a little bit unsettling when sat in the rear. However, with this car's slightly more controlled damping, it does feel a little bit more natural, a little bit more comfortable, and to that end, also a little bit more premium. And of course, being chauffeur driven in this car on the motorway, doing motorway speeds, I also benefited from the fact that this car is very quiet and very refined. Even though it has the aerodynamic properties of a small building, the wind noise around the car was sufficiently well suppressed, which again does lend to a slightly more premium sensation within the cabin. Now, from the driver's seat, the benefits of this upgraded suspension are a little bit harder to perceive because in terms of body control, yes, there is some degree of improvement, but it doesn't really improve much in terms of the overall drivability as far as I can tell, because it still feels like a very large, very heavy luxury van that you can't really run away from that no matter how trick your suspension might be. And it is worth pointing out the fact that it does appear as if the Denza D9 is not quite as comfortable as the Zeekr 009, which benefits from dual chamber air suspension, which then gives you a much softer, much more pillowy ride compared to this. However, one could also argue that these electrically adjustable dampers will most likely last longer compared to air suspension, although that is conjecture at this point. Now, the other point I'd like to touch on with this particular car and through this experience is actually energy efficiency. So while we were doing motorway speeds, driving all the way down to Desaru, we did notice that this car consumed quite a lot of power. Now, when I drove the front wheel drive to Alor Gajah and back, the car was averaging about 25 kilowatt hours to the 100, which means that on a 100 kilowatt hour battery, this car's fitted with 103 kilowatts, if I'm not mistaken, or kilowatt hours. It would mean a theoretical range of about 400 kilometers. This car, however, quite astoundingly, was reporting something toward the tune of about 28 to 30 kilowatt hours to the 100, which means that this all-wheel drive performance model will consume a lot more power, which means that you will be doing significantly less than 300 kilometers between charging stops. I think this is worth bearing in mind when you are or should you be considering between the two variants? Because yes, there are some other specification differences, such as the color of the upholstery and this digital rear view mirror, but these things are relatively minor. The overall experience remains the same between the two variants, and so to me, I think you ought to very carefully consider how you intend to use this car and whether or not you need the performance or the range. Now, I don't think anyone really needs the performance on offer with this car, which means the front wheel drive is probably better. But should you need all-port traction, then just be aware of the fact that there is a certain degree of compromise required in terms of overall driving range. So does that mean that I no longer need to take this car out on test? Absolutely not. I think there are still a few more questions that need to be answered with regards to this particular variant, and we'll attempt to answer those a little bit better when we actually get this car out on test. But in any case, that concludes our coverage of the Denza D9 Media Drive. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the description below, including the link to join our new WhatsApp channel. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care and stay safe.